Marcus Williams stood in his backyard on a warm Saturday morning, staring at the old swimming pool that had been nothing but trouble since he bought the house 6 months ago. The previous owners had left it in terrible condition, and despite his best efforts to repair it, the pool had become a constant source of stress and expense. The liner was cracked beyond repair, the pump system had failed twice, and now green algae covered the surface like a thick blanket. His neighbors in the Willowbrook subdivision had made their opinions about the pool very clear through sideways glances and not so subtle comments during their morning walks. Marcus had tried to be friendly when he first moved in, introducing himself to families on his street, but the responses had been lukewarm at best. Some neighbors barely acknowledged his presence while others offered polite but distant smiles before quickly excusing themselves. The pool removal decision hadn't been easy. Marcus worked as a software engineer at a tech company downtown, and the cost of properly renovating the pool would have eaten up most of his savings. He had gotten 3 different estimates, and each contractor had delivered the same bad news. It would cost more to fix than to remove and fill. After weeks of consideration, Marcus finally decided that removing the pool was the most practical solution. He had done his research thoroughly, checking city permits and HOA regulations. The Homeowners Association documents clearly stated that pool removal required proper permits and professional contractors, but nothing in the rules prohibited it. Marcus had filed all the necessary paperwork with the city and received approval 2 weeks prior. The HOA had been notified according to their guidelines, though he hadn't received any response from them yet. The contractor, Tony Rodriguez, arrived at 8 in the morning with his crew and equipment. Tony had been recommended by a colleague at work and came with excellent reviews and proper licensing. His crew was professional and experienced, and they began by draining the remaining water from the pool using powerful pumps. The sound of machinery filled the air as they worked methodically to break down the concrete structure. Marcus watched from his back porch, sipping coffee and feeling relieved that he was finally addressing this problem. His girlfriend Sarah had been supportive of the decision, though she couldn't be there that day due to a work conference. She had helped him research contractors and even offered to contribute to the cost. But Marcus insisted on handling it himself. The work was messy and loud, but Tony's crew was careful to contain debris and minimize impact on the surrounding landscape. They used tarps to protect Marcus's newly planted flower beds and took care not to damage the wooden fence he shared with his neighbors. Marcus appreciated their professionalism and attention to detail. Around 10 in the morning, Marcus noticed Mrs. Henderson from next door peering over the fence. She was an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and seemed to know everyone's business. When she spotted Marcus, she called out with obvious concern in her voice, "Marcus, dear, what on earth is happening over there? It sounds like a construction zone." Marcus walked over to the fence line and explained the situation. "I'm having the pool removed, Mrs. Henderson. It was in bad shape and would have cost too much to repair properly." Mrs. Henderson frowned and shook her head. "Oh my, I don't think that's allowed. Have you checked with the HOA? Patricia Morrison is the president, you know, and she's very particular about these things. She lives in the big house at the end of Maple Street." Marcus assured her that he had followed all proper procedures and obtained the necessary permits. Mrs. Henderson still looked worried but wished him luck before disappearing back into her house. Marcus thought little of the interaction and returned to monitoring the work progress. The crew made excellent progress throughout the morning. They had successfully broken up most of the concrete and were beginning to haul away the larger pieces. Marcus was impressed by their efficiency and began to envision how he would landscape the area once the work was complete. He planned to plant grass and maybe add some decorative shrubs along the edges. Just after noon, while Marcus was inside making lunch for the workers, he heard car doors slamming in his driveway. Through the front window, he saw a black sedan parked behind Tony's work truck. A woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and wearing expensive-looking clothes was marching toward his front door with determination written across her face. Before she could ring the doorbell, Marcus opened the door and stepped onto his front porch. The woman immediately launched into an aggressive interrogation without bothering to introduce herself. "Are you the homeowner here? What exactly do you think you're doing to that pool? Do you have any idea what you're doing to our property values?" Marcus remained calm and polite despite her hostile tone. "I'm Marcus Williams, and yes, I live here. I'm having my pool removed by licensed contractors with proper city permits. The woman's face reddened as she pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be emails or documents. I'm Patricia Morrison, HOA president, and I can tell you right now that this work is absolutely not approved. You can't just destroy community amenities without proper approval from the board. Marcus explained that he had submitted all required notifications to the HOA and received no response indicating any problems. He offered to show her the city permits and contractor licenses, but Patricia dismissed his explanations with an impatient wave of her hand. Those city permits mean nothing if you don't have HOA approval. This work stops right now, or I'm calling the authorities. You're in clear violation of our community standards, and I won't tolerate this kind of disruption. The confrontation was drawing attention from other neighbors who had come outside to see what was happening. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the public nature of the dispute, but tried to remain professional as he explained his position once again. Patricia was clearly not interested in hearing his side of the story. She announced that she would be back with proper authorities and stormed off to her car, leaving Marcus standing on his porch wondering what had just happened and what might come next. Marcus stood on his front porch for several minutes after Patricia Morrison drove away, trying to process what had just happened. He had never encountered such aggressive behavior from a neighbor before, and her threats about calling authorities seemed completely disproportionate to the situation. Tony Rodriguez had noticed the commotion and walked over from the backyard, his face showing concern about the heated exchange. "Everything okay, Mr. Williams? That lady seemed pretty upset about something." Marcus explained the situation while Tony listened and nodded thoughtfully. As an experienced contractor, Tony had dealt with difficult neighbors and HOA disputes before. He assured Marcus that all their permits were in order and that they weren't violating any city codes or regulations. "Look, I've been doing this for 15 years and we've got all our paperwork straight. Sometimes people get worked up about construction noise or changes in the neighborhood, but legally we're in the clear. If she wants to call someone, let her call. We're not doing anything wrong." Marcus felt somewhat reassured by Tony's confidence, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was about more than just pool removal. Patricia's aggressive tone and immediate assumption that he was in the wrong suggested something deeper was motivating her behavior. He had heard stories from other black homeowners about facing extra scrutiny from HOAs, but he had hoped his new neighborhood would be different. The work crew resumed their tasks while Marcus went inside to review his documentation one more time. He pulled out the folder containing his HOA communications, city permits, and contractor agreements. Everything was in order, exactly as he had explained to Patricia. He had followed every rule and procedure to the letter, yet somehow he was being treated like a criminal. Around 2 in the afternoon, Marcus received a text message from his girlfriend Sarah, asking how the pool removal was going. He decided not to mention the confrontation with Patricia yet, not wanting to worry her while she was at her conference. Instead, he replied that everything was progressing well and the crew was making good time. The afternoon heat was intense, so Marcus brought cold water bottles out to Tony's crew, who were grateful for the refreshment. They had made impressive progress and estimated they would finish the demolition by evening. The plan was to return on Monday with fill dirt to complete the project. As Marcus chatted with the workers, he noticed several neighbors had gathered at the end of his street, apparently discussing the ongoing work. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached the fence again, this time looking more anxious than curious. "Marcus, I just got off the phone with my friend Dorothy, and she said Patricia Morrison is really upset about this pool situation. She's been calling around to other HOA board members all afternoon. Dorothy thinks you might want to give Patricia a call to smooth things over before this gets out of hand." Marcus appreciated Mrs. Henderson's concern, but he felt frustrated that he was being expected to apologize for following proper procedures. He had done nothing wrong, yet somehow he was the one who needed to make peace with an aggressive neighbor who had stormed onto his property making threats. "I understand Patricia has concerns, Mrs. Henderson, but I followed all the rules. I'm not sure what else I can do to address her issues." Mrs. Henderson nodded sympathetically, but warned that Patricia had a reputation for escalating conflicts when she felt the HOA's authority was being challenged. She suggested that Marcus might want to attend the next HOA board meeting to present his case formally, even though it wasn't technically required. As the afternoon progressed, Marcus noticed more neighbors walking by his house than usual, some stopping to stare at the work being done in his backyard. A few offered friendly waves, but others simply gawked before moving on. The attention made him uncomfortable, as he preferred to keep a low profile in his new neighborhood. Around 4 o'clock, Tony's crew began cleaning up for the day. They had successfully removed all the concrete debris and hauled it away in their trucks. The empty space where the pool had been looked strange and somewhat sad, but Marcus felt relieved to have the problem finally resolved. Tony scheduled the final phase of the work for Monday morning, when they would bring soil to fill the remaining hole. Just as Tony was loading the last of his equipment, Marcus heard sirens approaching from the direction of the main road. Initially, he thought nothing of it, assuming emergency vehicles were responding to an incident elsewhere in the neighborhood. However, his stomach dropped when he saw 2 police cars turn onto his street and pull into his driveway. 4 officers emerged from the vehicles, and Marcus immediately felt his heart rate increase. He had done nothing wrong, but the sight of police officers approaching his home in response to a neighbor complaint triggered anxiety he had hoped never to experience. Tony and his crew stopped what they were doing and watched nervously as the officers approached. The lead officer, a middle-aged man with graying hair, spoke in a professional but serious tone. "Good afternoon, sir. I'm Officer Johnson with the Municipal Police. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction work being conducted at this address. Are you the homeowner?" Marcus confirmed his identity and calmly explained the situation while retrieving his permit documentation from inside the house. Officer Johnson reviewed the paperwork carefully, while his colleagues examined the work site and spoke with Tony about his contractor's license and insurance. "These permits appear to be in order," Officer Johnson acknowledged after several minutes of review. "However, we also received complaints about potential HOA violations and disturbance of community standards. Do you have documentation showing HOA approval for this work?" Marcus showed the officer his HOA notification letter and explained that the association's governing documents didn't require pre-approval for pool removal, only proper notification, which he had provided. Officer Johnson studied the documents but admitted he wasn't qualified to interpret HOA regulations. While this discussion was happening, Marcus noticed Patricia Morrison's black sedan parked at the end of the street, and he could see her talking on her phone while watching the police interaction. The realization that she had actually followed through on her threat to call authorities made him angry. But he forced himself to remain calm and cooperative with the officers. Tony stepped forward to provide additional documentation about his company's licensing and insurance coverage. He also offered to contact the city permit office to verify the legitimacy of their authorization. Officer Johnson appreciated the cooperation and spent several minutes on his radio confirming the permit details with city officials. After about 30 minutes of investigation, Officer Johnson returned Marcus's documents and addressed both him and Tony directly. "Everything appears to be in order from a legal standpoint. You have proper permits and licensing for this work. However, I would recommend reaching out to your HOA to address any concerns they might have through their proper channels." The officers prepared to leave, but Officer Johnson pulled Marcus aside for a brief private conversation. His tone became more personal and understanding as he offered some advice based on his years of experience dealing with neighborhood disputes. Officer Johnson looked around to make sure they couldn't be overheard before speaking in a lower, more personal tone. "Look, Mr. Williams, I've been doing this job for 22 years, and I've seen this kind of situation before. Technically, you're completely in the right here. Your permits are valid, your contractor is licensed, and you're not breaking any laws. But sometimes in these neighborhoods, being right isn't enough to avoid trouble." Marcus listened carefully, appreciating the officer's honesty and experience. Officer Johnson continued, "That woman who called us, Patricia Morrison, she's called the police on neighbors at least 6 times in the past 2 years. Usually it's about noise complaints, parking violations, or HOA disputes. We have to respond to every call, but most of the time it's just neighbor conflicts that should be handled through proper channels." The officer's words confirmed what Marcus had begun to suspect about Patricia's pattern of behavior. It seemed he wasn't the first neighbor to experience her aggressive approach to perceived violations of her standards. "My advice? Document everything. Keep copies of all your permits, communications with the HOA, and any interactions with neighbors. If she continues to harass you or call the police without legitimate cause, you might have grounds for a harassment complaint yourself. Marcus thanked Officer Johnson for his candid advice and watched as the police cars pulled out of his driveway. Tony and his crew had finished loading their equipment and were ready to leave for the day. Tony assured Marcus that Monday's work would go smoothly and that they would complete the project without any further complications. After everyone left, Marcus sat on his back porch and called Sarah to update her on the day's events. She was shocked and angry about Patricia's behavior and the police being called, but she wasn't entirely surprised. Sarah worked in real estate and had heard similar stories from other clients about HOA conflicts and difficult neighbors. This is exactly the kind of thing I was worried about when we were looking at houses in that neighborhood, Sarah said. Remember how we talked about some of those HOAs being really strict and sometimes discriminatory? It sounds like you're dealing with exactly that kind of person. Marcus had hoped those concerns were overblown, but Patricia's immediate hostility and assumption that he was violating rules suggested his race might indeed be a factor in her reaction. He had worked hard to afford a home in a nice neighborhood and had expected to be welcomed as a new neighbor, not treated with suspicion and aggression. That evening, Marcus decided to do some research on Patricia Morrison and the HOA board. He found the association's website and discovered that Patricia had been president for 3 consecutive terms, which seemed unusual. The board meeting minutes from the past year showed a pattern of conflicts with various homeowners over issues like landscaping, holiday decorations, and exterior modifications. One particular case caught his attention. About 8 months ago, the board had forced a Hispanic family to remove a small playground set from their backyard, claiming it violated aesthetic standards. The family had fought the decision but eventually complied after facing mounting fines and legal threats. Marcus wondered if there was a pattern of selective enforcement against minority homeowners. Marcus spent the rest of the evening reviewing the HOA's governing documents in detail. The rules were extensive and sometimes contradictory, but he couldn't find anything that clearly prohibited pool removal with proper permits. In fact, several clauses emphasized homeowner rights to modify their properties as long as city regulations were followed. Sunday morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mrs. Henderson knocked on Marcus's front door. Carrying a plate of homemade cookies and wearing an apologetic expression, she had come to warn him about developments in the neighborhood overnight. "I wanted you to know that Patricia has been calling people all evening," Mrs. Henderson explained. "She's trying to organize some kind of emergency HOA meeting about your pool situation. She's telling people that you're destroying property values and setting a dangerous precedent for unauthorized modifications." Mrs. Henderson handed him the cookies and continued with obvious discomfort. "I don't agree with how she's handling this, Marcus. You seem like a nice young man, and you've been nothing but polite to everyone. But Patricia has a lot of influence in this neighborhood, and some people are starting to side with her just to avoid conflict." Marcus appreciated Mrs. Henderson's honesty and her willingness to warn him about Patricia's continued campaign against him. It was clear that this conflict was about more than just the pool removal. Patricia seemed determined to make an example of him, possibly to reinforce her authority as HOA president. "What would you suggest I do, Mrs. Henderson? I followed all the rules, but she seems determined to cause problems for me." Mrs. Henderson suggested that Marcus consider attending the emergency meeting if Patricia managed to organize one. She also recommended that he reach out to other board members individually to present his side of the story, before Patricia could frame the narrative entirely from her perspective. After Mrs. Henderson left, Marcus spent time researching his rights as a homeowner and HOA member. He discovered that emergency meetings required specific procedures and notifications, and that Patricia couldn't simply call one without following proper protocols. He also learned about his right to appeal any decisions and to request mediation for disputes. Monday morning arrived with unseasonably cool weather, which Marcus hoped might make the final day of construction more comfortable for Tony's crew. They arrived promptly at 8 o'clock with trucks full of clean filled dirt and topsoil. The plan was to fill the former pool area and grade it properly for eventual grass seeding. As the crew began their work, Marcus noticed several neighbors watching from their yards and windows. The attention made him self-conscious, but he tried to focus on the positive aspects of completing this project. Once the area was properly filled and landscaped, His backyard would look much better than it had with the deteriorating pool. Around 10 in the morning, Marcus received a phone call from an unknown local number. When he answered, a man's voice identified himself as Robert Chen, a member of the HOA Board of Directors. "Mr. Williams, I'm calling about the situation with your pool removal. Patricia Morrison contacted me yesterday claiming that you're violating association rules, but I wanted to hear your side of the story before making any judgments." Marcus was relieved to finally speak with a reasonable board member. He explained the entire situation to Robert, including his proper permit procedures, Patricia's aggressive confrontation, and the unnecessary police call. Robert listened carefully and asked several thoughtful questions about the timeline and documentation. "I have to tell you, Mr. Williams, this doesn't sound like a violation to me based on what you're describing. Patricia can be enthusiastic about enforcing rules, but sometimes she oversteps her authority. Pool removal with proper permits should be perfectly acceptable under our guidelines." Robert's reasonable response gave Marcus hope that not all board members would automatically side with Patricia. Robert explained that he planned to review the association's rules carefully and consult with the other board members before taking any position on the matter. "Want you to know that if Patricia calls an emergency meeting about this, you have the right to attend and present your case. Don't let her intimidate you into thinking you've done something wrong when you've clearly followed proper procedures." The conversation with Robert improved Marcus's mood significantly. It was refreshing to interact with someone who approached the situation logically rather than emotionally. He began to feel more optimistic about resolving this conflict through reasonable discussion with rational board members. The work in Marcus's backyard progressed smoothly throughout Monday morning. Tony's crew had nearly finished filling the former pool area with clean dirt and were beginning to grade the surface for proper drainage. Marcus felt satisfied watching the transformation of his backyard from a problem area into a blank canvas for future landscaping projects. Around noon, while Marcus was inside preparing lunch, he heard a car door slam in his driveway with unusual force. Through the front window, he saw Patricia Morrison's black sedan parked behind one of Tony's trucks, effectively blocking the contractor's exit. This time, Patricia wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit was walking alongside her toward the backyard, carrying what appeared to be legal documents. Marcus quickly went outside to intercept them before they could harass his workers. Patricia spotted him and immediately launched into another aggressive confrontation, this time with backup support. "Mr. Williams, this is David Kramer, our HOA attorney. We're here to serve you with a cease and desist order for this unauthorized construction project. All work must stop immediately until this matter is resolved through proper legal channels." The attorney stepped forward and handed Marcus an official-looking document. "Sir, this is a formal notice that you are in violation of your homeowners association agreement. Continued work on this project could result in significant fines and legal action against you personally." Marcus quickly scanned the document while Tony approached from the backyard, clearly frustrated by this latest interruption. The cease and desist order claimed that Marcus had failed to obtain proper HOA approval and was conducting work that violated community standards and property value protections. "This is ridiculous," Tony interjected. "We have all the proper permits from the city, and this work is completely legal. You can't just show up with a piece of paper and shut down a legitimate construction project." Patricia's face flushed red as she turned her attention to Tony. "This is a private community matter, and you have no right to interfere. If you continue this work, you'll be liable for any damages to community property values." The attorney raised his hand to calm the situation, but maintained his stern demeanor. "Gentlemen, this is a legal notice that must be taken seriously. Regardless of city permits, homeowner association agreements are binding contracts that supersede individual preferences." Marcus felt his anger rising but forced himself to remain calm and professional. He had anticipated that Patricia might escalate the situation, but bringing a lawyer seemed like an extreme overreaction to a perfectly legal home improvement project. "Mr. Kramer, I'd like to review this document carefully with my own attorney before making any decisions about stopping work. Can you give me until tomorrow morning to respond?" The attorney consulted with Patricia briefly before agreeing to a 24-hour delay. However, he warned that any work completed after receiving the cease and desist order could result in additional penalties and complications. After Patricia and the attorney left, Marcus immediately called Robert Chen to inform him about this latest development. Robert was shocked and angry about Patricia's decision to bring in legal representation without consulting other board members. "This is completely inappropriate, Mr. Williams. Patricia doesn't have the authority to hire attorneys or issue cease and desist orders on behalf of the board without a formal vote. She's acting on her own initiative here, and I'm going to call an emergency board meeting to address her behavior." Robert's support was encouraging, but Marcus realized he needed professional legal advice to protect himself from Patricia's increasingly aggressive tactics. He called several attorneys that afternoon and managed to schedule a consultation for early Tuesday morning. Tony and his crew reluctantly stopped work for the day, though they had nearly completed the project. Tony was frustrated by the legal complications, but assured Marcus that they would be ready to finish quickly once the situation was resolved. That evening, Marcus received an unexpected phone call from his neighbor across the street, Jennifer Walsh. She had been watching the ongoing conflict with growing concern and wanted to offer her support. "Marcus, I just wanted you to know that not everyone in this neighborhood agrees with Patricia's behavior. My husband and I think what she's doing is completely inappropriate, and we're planning to attend the board meeting to speak in your favor." Jennifer's call was followed by similar messages from two other neighbors who had witnessed Patricia's aggressive tactics and disagreed with her approach. Marcus was surprised and grateful to learn that he had more support in the neighborhood than he had realized. Sarah returned from her conference Tuesday morning and was furious when Marcus updated her on the weekend's developments. She had experience dealing with HOA disputes through her real estate work and immediately offered to help research Patricia's authority and the association's legal procedures. Marcus's appointment with attorney Lisa Martinez went well. She reviewed the cease and desist order and quickly identified several procedural problems with Patricia's approach. According to the HOA's own governing documents, legal action required approval from a majority of board members, which Patricia clearly hadn't obtained. "This cease and desist order is essentially worthless," Attorney Martinez explained. "Patricia Morrison doesn't have the individual authority to hire attorneys or issue legal notices on behalf of the HOA. She's acting outside her scope of authority as president." Attorney Martinez also pointed out that Marcus's pool removal clearly fell within acceptable modifications under the association's rules, especially with proper city permits. She offered to represent Marcus if the situation continued to escalate, but she was optimistic that reasonable board members would resolve the matter quickly. Armed with this legal opinion, Marcus felt confident returning home to meet with Robert Chen, who had called an emergency board meeting for Tuesday evening. Robert had managed to contact the other 3 board members, and all of them were concerned about Patricia's unauthorized legal actions. The emergency meeting was held at the community center, and Marcus was surprised by the number of neighbors who attended to show support for his position. Jennifer Walsh and her husband were there, along with Mrs. Henderson and several other residents who had grown tired of Patricia's authoritarian approach to HOA management. Patricia arrived at the meeting with David Kramer, apparently expecting to present a united front against Marcus. However, her confidence quickly faded when Robert Chen opened the meeting by questioning her authority to hire legal representation without board approval. "Patricia, you've exceeded your authority as president by hiring an attorney and issuing legal notices without consulting the board. This kind of unilateral action violates our own governing procedures and puts the association at risk for liability." Board member Susan Taylor, a retired teacher, was equally critical of Patricia's approach. "I've reviewed Mr. Williams's documentation and everything appears to be in perfect order. His pool removal is properly permitted and doesn't violate any of our actual rules. I don't understand why this has become such a contentious issue." The third board member, Michael Torres, a local business owner, expressed frustration with the entire situation. "We're supposed to be maintaining property values and community standards, not harassing homeowners who are improving their properties through legal means. This conflict is exactly the kind of thing that gives HOAs a bad reputation." Patricia attempted to defend her actions by claiming that she was protecting community interests and preventing a dangerous precedent of unauthorized modifications. However, her arguments fell flat when multiple board members pointed out that Marcus's Modifications were clearly authorized by proper permits. Marcus was invited to present his side of the story to the board and attending neighbors. He calmly explained his decision-making process, showed his documentation, and emphasized his desire to be a good neighbor and community member. His presentation was well received and several attendees applauded when he finished. The formal vote was overwhelmingly in Marcus's favor. 4 of the 5 board members voted to dismiss Patricia's complaints and allow Marcus to complete his pool removal project. Only Patricia voted to continue the legal action, leaving her isolated and clearly frustrated by the outcome. Robert Chen announced that the cease and desist order was hereby revoked and that Marcus could resume work immediately. He also warned Patricia that any further unauthorized legal actions would result in her removal from the board. After the board meeting ended with such a decisive victory, Marcus felt a tremendous sense of relief and vindication. The other board members approached him individually to apologize for Patricia's behavior and to welcome him properly to the neighborhood. Robert Chen was particularly apologetic and assured Marcus that Patricia would face consequences for her unauthorized actions. However, Patricia Morrison was far from finished. As neighbors were leaving the community center, she cornered Marcus near the parking lot with David Kramer still at her side. Her face was flushed with anger and embarrassment from the public rejection of her position by her fellow board members. "This isn't over. Mr. Williams, the board may have made a mistake tonight, but I have other options available to protect this community's standards. You've set a dangerous precedent that will encourage other homeowners to ignore proper procedures." Marcus tried to remain diplomatic despite Patricia's continued hostility. "Mrs. Morrison, I followed all proper procedures from the beginning. I hope we can move forward as neighbors and put this conflict behind us." Patricia's response was to turn away without acknowledging his attempt at reconciliation. She got into her car with the attorney and drove off, leaving Marcus with an uneasy feeling that she might still cause more problems, despite the board's clear decision. The next morning, Marcus called Tony Rodriguez to let him know work could resume immediately. Tony was relieved and scheduled his crew to return that afternoon to complete the final grading and soil preparation. The project was so close to completion that they estimated finishing everything by the end of the day. While waiting for the crew to arrive, Marcus received a surprise visit from Jennifer Walsh and her husband Kevin. They brought a bottle of wine and a welcome basket, filled with local restaurant gift, certificates and information about neighborhood activities. "We wanted to properly welcome you to Willowbrook," Jennifer explained. "We're embarrassed by how Patricia treated you, and we want you to know that most of us are much more reasonable and friendly than she is." Kevin nodded in agreement and shared some background about Patricia's history in the neighborhood. "She's been president for way too long and has gotten increasingly controlling over the years. Last night's vote was actually a long time coming. Many of us have been frustrated with her approach but didn't know how to address it until your situation brought everything to a head." Marcus appreciated their gesture and their honesty about the neighborhood dynamics. It was encouraging to learn that Patricia's behavior wasn't representative of the community as a whole, and that his conflict had actually helped other residents find their voice against her authoritarian management style. Tony's crew returned in the afternoon and made quick work of finishing the project. They completed the final grading, spread topsoil evenly across the former pool area, and even helped Marcus plan the layout for grass seeding and landscaping. The transformation was remarkable, and Marcus felt proud of how much better his backyard looked. As the crew was packing up their equipment, Marcus noticed Patricia's black sedan driving slowly past his house several times. She appeared to be taking photographs of the completed work, which seemed odd and somewhat concerning. Marcus mentioned this to Tony, who suggested documenting the finished project himself in case there were any future disputes about the quality or scope of work. That evening, Sarah helped Marcus take detailed photographs of the completed project from multiple angles. They also documented all the permits, invoices, and board meeting minutes related to the pool removal. Sarah suggested creating a comprehensive file in case Patricia tried to create new problems down the road. Thursday morning brought another unexpected development. Marcus received a certified letter in the mail from a different law firm, apparently hired by Patricia personally rather than through the HOA. The letter threatened a lawsuit for destruction of community amenities and illegal modification of shared neighborhood resources. Marcus immediately called Attorney Martinez, who was both amused and annoyed by Patricia's latest tactic. "This is getting ridiculous, Mr. Williams. Patricia Morrison is now acting as a private citizen rather than an HOA officer, which means she has absolutely no standing to challenge your home improvements. This is clearly harassment at this point." Attorney Martinez explained that the pool had been entirely on Marcus's private property and was never a community amenity. Patricia's legal theory had no basis in law or fact, and any attorney who filed such a lawsuit would be risking sanctions for frivolous litigation. "I think it's time to consider filing a harassment complaint against Mrs. Morrison. Her pattern of behavior has gone well beyond legitimate HOA concerns and into the realm of personal vendetta. We have plenty of documentation to support a restraining order if necessary." Marcus was hesitant to escalate the situation further, but he was getting tired of Patricia's continued attempts to make his life difficult. He asked Attorney Martinez to prepare a formal cease and desist letter to Patricia, warning her that any further harassment could result in legal consequences for her personally. Friday afternoon brought news that Patricia had called the City Code Enforcement Office to file a complaint about Marcus's pool removal project. The city inspector who had originally approved the permits was now required to conduct a follow-up inspection to verify that the work had been completed according to specifications. Inspector Rodriguez arrived on Monday morning and spent about an hour examining the completed project. He reviewed Tony's contractor documentation, checked the grading and drainage, and confirmed that everything had been done properly according to the approved plans. "Everything looks perfect. Mr. Williams, your contractor did excellent work, and the project meets all city standards. I'll file a report confirming that the work was completed satisfactorily according to permits, Inspector." Rodriguez also mentioned that Patricia's complaint had included several false claims about improper soil disposal and drainage violations. After seeing the actual work site, he was confident that her complaint had been filed in bad faith. "Between you and me, we get complaints like this sometimes from neighbors who are just looking to cause trouble. Your project is completely legitimate, and I'll make sure my report reflects that clearly." The inspector's positive report gave Marcus additional documentation to support his position if Patricia continued her harassment campaign. He was beginning to build an impressive file of evidence, showing that he had followed all proper procedures while Patricia had repeatedly acted inappropriately. That evening, Robert Chen called to update Marcus on board business. The other board members had decided to formally censure Patricia for her unauthorized legal actions and to strip her of some presidential powers. They were also considering calling for new board elections to allow the community to choose more representative leadership. "We want you to know that the board takes this situation very seriously, Marcus. Patricia's behavior has been completely unacceptable, and we're taking steps to ensure it doesn't happen again. We also want to apologize again for not addressing her authoritarian tendencies sooner." Robert also shared some interesting information about other neighbors who had approached board members to share their own stories about Patricia's problematic behavior over the years. Several residents had apparently been intimidated by her aggressive tactics and had simply complied with unreasonable demands rather than fight back. The Martinez family told us that Patricia forced them to repaint their house because she didn't like the shade of beige they had chosen, even though it was within the approved color palette. The Johnsons said she made them remove holiday decorations in January because she thought they were up too long. "There's a pattern here that we should have addressed much sooner." Marcus was shocked to learn that his experience wasn't unique. It seemed Patricia had been using her position to bully various neighbors for years, and his successful resistance had encouraged others to speak up about their own negative experiences. The weekend brought a welcome break from HOA drama. Marcus and Sarah spent Saturday morning seeding grass in the former pool area and planning their landscaping design. They decided to create a small garden area with native plants and maybe add a patio for outdoor entertaining. Mrs. Henderson stopped by to admire the finished project and to share some gossip about Patricia's reaction to the week's events. "She's been telling anyone who will listen that you're a troublemaker who doesn't respect community standards. But honestly, most people are getting tired of her complaints. Even her closest supporters are starting to question her judgment." Sunday afternoon brought an unexpected visitor that changed everything. Marcus was working in his yard when a police car pulled up to Patricia's house across the street. Two officers spent about 30 minutes inside before emerging with Patricia in handcuffs. Jennifer Walsh came over immediately to share what she had witnessed. "Marcus, you're not going to believe this. The police arrested Patricia for filing false police reports. Apparently, they investigated her complaint about your pool and discovered she had lied about several facts in her report." The news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Marcus learned that Patricia had told police that he was dumping contaminated soil illegally and creating drainage problems for neighboring properties. When investigators checked these claims, they found them to be completely false and filed charges against Patricia for knowingly making false statements to law enforcement. The arrest was the final straw for many neighbors who had been on the fence about Patricia's leadership. By Monday morning, Robert Chen had received formal petitions from over 60% of homeowners calling for Patricia's immediate removal from the board and new elections for all positions. Marcus received a call from Attorney Martinez with additional news about Patricia's legal troubles. "Mr. Williams, it turns out that Patricia Morrison has been using HOA funds to pay for personal legal fees without board authorization. The other board members discovered this when they reviewed the association's financial records. She's now facing potential embezzlement charges in addition to the false reporting case." The revelation about misused HOA funds shocked the entire community. Patricia had apparently been treating the association's treasury as her personal legal fund for various disputes with neighbors and local authorities. The total amount involved was substantial enough to trigger serious criminal charges. Wednesday brought the best news yet. Patricia's attorney called Marcus's attorney to propose a settlement agreement. Patricia would agree to resign from all HOA positions, stop all harassment activities, and pay Marcus's legal fees in exchange for him not pursuing additional charges or civil litigation. "She's clearly trying to minimize her legal exposure," Attorney Martinez explained. "With the criminal charges she's already facing, she can't afford to have additional civil suits complicating her situation. I think this settlement offer shows that she's finally realized she went too far." Marcus was inclined to accept the settlement, not because he was afraid of continued legal battles, but because he wanted to move forward with his life and enjoy his home without constant conflict. Sarah agreed that getting Patricia out of their lives permanently was worth more than pursuing additional legal remedies. The settlement was finalized by Friday, and Patricia's resignation from the HOA board was announced in a letter to all residents. The letter briefly explained that she was stepping down for personal reasons, though most neighbors understood the real story by that point. Robert Chen was elected as interim president until new elections could be held in 60 days. His first official act was to send Marcus a formal letter of apology on behalf of the HOA and to establish new procedures to prevent future abuse of presidential powers. 3 months after the pool removal project began, Marcus stood in his backyard admiring the lush green grass that now covered the former pool area. The landscaping project had exceeded his expectations, and the space had become his favorite part of the property. Sarah had helped him design a beautiful garden border with native flowers that attracted butterflies and birds throughout the day. The transformation extended beyond just his backyard. The entire neighborhood seemed different after Patricia's departure. Robert Chen had proven to be an excellent interim president, focusing on actual community improvements rather than petty enforcement actions. The monthly HOA meetings had become productive discussions about maintaining property values through positive initiatives rather than intimidation tactics. Marcus had received dozens of apologies from neighbors who admitted they had been afraid to oppose Patricia's increasingly authoritarian approach to community management. Many residents confessed that they had witnessed her inappropriate behavior toward other homeowners but had been too intimidated to speak up until Marcus's situation provided a catalyst for change. The new board elections had brought fresh leadership to the HOA. Jennifer Walsh was elected as the new president, running on a platform of reasonable enforcement and transparent communication. Her husband Kevin joined the board as treasurer, committed to ensuring proper oversight of association finances. The election results showed overwhelming community support for a more collaborative approach to neighborhood governance. Marcus's relationship with his neighbors had improved dramatically. Mrs. Henderson had become a close friend, often bringing him vegetables from her garden and asking for his advice on technology issues. The Martinez family invited him and Sarah to their daughter's quinceañera, and the Johnsons included them in their annual block party planning committee. One particularly satisfying development was the friendship that grew between Marcus and Tony Rodriguez. The contractor had been so impressed by Marcus's character during the conflict that he recommended him for a technology consulting position with his construction company. Marcus now helped Tony implement project management software and digital scheduling systems, creating a profitable side business. The legal aftermath of Patricia's actions had continued to unfold over the months. She had ultimately pleaded guilty to filing false police reports and was sentenced to community service and probation. The embezzlement charges related to misusing HOA funds resulted in a separate conviction and restitution payments to the association. Her legal troubles had effectively ended any possibility of her returning to neighborhood leadership. Marcus learned through Robert Chen that Patricia had eventually sold her house and moved to a different state, apparently unable to face the social consequences of her behavior in Willowbrook. Her departure marked the end of an era of fear and intimidation that had affected the entire community for years. The pool removal project had cost Marcus about $8,000, but the ordeal had taught him valuable lessons about standing up for his rights and the importance of thorough documentation. Attorney Martinez had become a friend and advisor, helping him understand homeowner rights and HOA regulations that he never expected to need. Sarah had been promoted to senior real estate agent at her company, partly due to her expertise in helping clients navigate HOA issues based on her experience with Marcus's situation. She had become a sought-after advisor for buyers concerned about moving into communities with problematic associations. The backyard that had once been a source of stress and conflict had become a gathering place for friends and neighbors. Marcus and Sarah hosted their first barbecue party in late summer, with over 30 neighbors attending to celebrate the completion of their landscaping project. The event became an annual tradition that strengthened community bonds and demonstrated how positive leadership could transform neighborhood relationships. Marcus often reflected on how different his experience might have been if he had simply given in to Patricia's initial demands. By standing firm on his rights and following proper procedures, he had not only protected himself but had inadvertently liberated an entire community from years of inappropriate governance. The incident had also strengthened his relationship with Sarah. Watching her support him through the conflict and contribute her expertise to resolving it had convinced him that she was the right partner for facing life's challenges. They became engaged 6 months after the pool removal was completed, with plans to build their life together in the home that had been the center of so much controversy. Inspector Rodriguez had become an unexpected ally, often stopping by to check on Marcus's ongoing home improvement projects and to offer advice on permit procedures. The inspector had been so impressed by the quality of Tony's work that he began recommending the contractor to other homeowners, creating a beneficial relationship for everyone involved. Marcus's experience had attracted attention beyond his immediate neighborhood. Local news media covered the story as an example of HOA overreach and the importance of community members standing up against abuse of authority. Marcus was invited to speak at several community forums about homeowner rights and proper HOA governance. The former pool area had been transformed into a meditation garden with comfortable seating and aromatic plants that created a peaceful retreat from the stresses of daily life. Marcus spent many evenings there, reading or simply enjoying the tranquility that had replaced the anxiety and conflict of the previous year. 1 year after the pool removal, Marcus received a thank you card signed by over 40 neighbors expressing gratitude for his courage in challenging Patricia's inappropriate behavior. The card included photos from various community events that had been organized under the new board's leadership, showing children playing together, families sharing meals, and neighbors working collaboratively on improvement projects. The experience had taught Marcus that standing up for what is right often requires courage and persistence, but that the results can benefit an entire community. His simple decision to remove a deteriorating pool had accidentally become a catalyst for positive change that extended far beyond his property lines. Looking back, Marcus realized that the conflict had been about much more than pool removal. It had been about respect, fairness, and the right of all community members to be treated with dignity regardless of their background. By refusing to be intimidated and by following proper procedures throughout the ordeal, he had demonstrated that reasonable people could prevail against unreasonable authority. The new HOA board had implemented policies to prevent future abuse of power, including term limits for officers, required board approval for legal expenses, and transparent procedures for handling community disputes. These changes ensured that no future resident would face the kind of harassment that Marcus had endured. As Marcus prepared to propose to Sarah in the garden that had grown where his problematic pool once stood, he felt grateful for the journey that had brought them to this point. The space represented not just the successful completion of a home improvement project, but the triumph of community cooperation over individual tyranny. The grass was greener, the neighbors were friendlier, and the future looked brighter than he had ever imagined when he first decided to remove that old swimming pool.